to the Board of Aldermen Budget Work Session, Part 2. Prayer will be offered by Alderman Brinson.
Please bow your head. Lord, we thank you so much for the opportunity to gather together and to discuss and to debate and to decide for the goodness of the people, for the goodness of the city. And we ask for your wisdom and guidance and your direction in everything that we do today.
Thank you. City Manager, Mr. Reed.
Good afternoon, everyone, and we have had a sleepless night working on the budget based on some direction that we were given. And so we're going to cover a few things before we actually get into updated recommendations. So if you'll look at the presentation here, there was a question about staffing over the last 5 years. And unfortunately, we did not have anything to hand out. We've just been so busy getting prepared for this, so we apologize for that. But we'll send you an email out on this. So position history. While she's working on that, so what we did was we looked back over the last 5 years, the 5-year history with FY29. We had in the general fund, we had 305 budgeted positions. Currently for the FY25 budget, we're recommending 325. So that's over 5 years, 20 positions have been introduced. And that has come from adding positions in administration with assistant city manager. It has come with adding some techs in technology. It has come from adding at least one position in finance. It has come from adding 4 positions in PD. It's come from adding 2 positions in fire rescue, 3 positions in parks and recreation, with the most recent 2 positions being 4 part-time staff members. And it has increased from development services in that time frame, 1 staff member. Public Works actually has seen a reduction from 48 to 44, so a loss of 4 staff members. So I'm not recommending any change or any reduction in our overall staff. Staff is pretty taxed with the jobs that they have to do. Now, while we do have turnover with a variety of positions, as you saw with the handout yesterday, such as police and the telecommunicators, those positions, it's just a constant revolving door. When people get into doing that type of work, they realize either they like it or they don't like it. So that's the constant changeover. You also saw some information in that handout yesterday about when it came to fire rescue, they used, it was the fire specialist. I believe that there were 5 vacancies in that, and just to give you a little bit more clarification, what that accounted for was we recently had a captain that retired, a fire engineer that retired, and a fire specialist 3 that has moved on. And so we did have 2 specialist positions that were replaced, but traditionally in fire rescue and in police, employees are promoted from within to those positions, and so that's why you see those 5 vacancies. So I'm not recommending any reduction in those at all. We're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about debt service. So we can go to that slide.
Well, just real quick.
Yes.
So you move on. I mean, the 325, I think just to address what the mayor was suggesting, there are not bodies in all 325 positions currently.
That's correct.
There were 5 or so that are currently vacant and vacant for some extended period of time.
So at any given time during the budget year, we have 325 budgeted positions, and so at any given time, we could be down 15 or 20. We have 15 or 20 vacancies in the general fund, just based on that frame.
So I just, based on what you just said, just so I'm clear and everybody else, the mayor had suggested maybe looking at those current vacant positions and making a decision as to whether any change from the 325, whether there's a body in it or?
That's correct, I'm not. And what we've seen, and he pointed out yesterday, he was looking at positions that had not been filled since 2023. So we've had several folks that left at the end of 2023. That doesn't mean that we haven't advertised those positions. What most likely has happened is we probably didn't get qualified enough candidates that met our standards to hire them. And so a lot of those positions are still vacant. So that's why I'm still recommending that we do not reduce those positions. So I've got a little bit more information coming up for you. So if we can go ahead and go to the fund balance part, I'm going to have Kim talk through that so you can understand what our fund balance situation is based on the last audit.
Sure. I'm not sure if you received your email last night, but I went ahead and emailed this with a little bit of explanation. What this shows you is the last, well, since 2020, what our fund balance has been, and at the end of every fiscal year. These are audited amounts as of 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. As you know, we try to do an estimate about every quarter of where we think we're going to be for this year, which is difficult because not all of your revenues, expenses, assets, liabilities are really posted. Anyways, if we take a look at June 30th, 2023, we returned back to fund balance a total of $9.1 million. But of that, we had 6.5, which is hard to tell the color, but the top there is purple, and that is the assigned funds through the ARC enabled funds. Then the green is committed by the board, and that's commitments for specific purposes or constraints imposed by the board, such as our fund balance policy. So if that is what the green is. The red is restricted, and that's restricted for stabilization by state statutes. For example, Powell bill for streets, and there's some public safety, federal forfeiture, and controlled substances, economic and physical development. That's all restricted, so that you can only use for that specific purpose. So that leaves us with 6.98, well, actually, yeah, for this year it's 6.98, but it left us with, the blue is the unassigned. The unassigned that we added back was, so of the 9.1, we added 1.8 back to unassigned last year.
And the unassigned is basically, the board can choose to allocate those funds for whatever you wish to. There are no restrictions on those.
Right. So, which left us with about, of the available, it was 40% of our FY23 expenditures.
I'm not good. Which one of those dollar amounts equate to the unassigned?
It's the very bottom one.
Okay,
So,
6.98 million?
yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Mhm. That's our estimate. Are there any questions on this slide?
If you want to go back to, let's talk a little bit about during Hurricane Florence. As you remember, during Hurricane Florence, we had to use a considerable amount of fund balance to do cleanups. And we found out at that time, all it takes is one storm to get us in a heap jam. And it took a while to start getting those reimbursements from FEMA. So even though we have been allocated quite a bit of money from FEMA, when we do a project now that's FEMA covered, it's still reimbursement based, which means we still have to pull from fund balance. And then when we get those reimbursements back from FEMA, that goes back into our savings account. So, and you can see, go back to that other slide real quick. You can see back in 2020 where our unrestricted fund balance was back in 2020. There was very, very little here. So we've been fortunate enough to be able to, actually it was in the negative. So we've been able to grow that back to almost 7 million. And the goal is to continue having a positive fund balance in that. So any questions on fund balance continue.
How much more is left out there from, that we haven't received from hurricane accounts?
We have,
And which would be included in that unassigned, correct?
this is a better picture of
Okay.
where we're at with, fund
Right.
balance with hurricane funds. So you can see historically in 2019, that blue bar represents our fund balance including hurricane funds.
Okay.
So hurricane funds impacted us in such a negative way that we were sitting pretty low, right?
Mhm.
And then, as we started working on reimbursements, where we're at today, there's just definitely a lot less of a gap there. This, I just want to make sure I point out that even though I just said 40% fund balance is where we are with unassigned, in this, they included the ARPA funds. So I just need to make sure that you do, realize that. So our percentage would drop, if I subtracted those ARPA funds from that, then it would drop to 40%. We wouldn't be sitting at 60 and 50%, so. What we had outstanding, the last report that we submitted, to the board, I think it showed $8 million of, we're waiting on reimbursements from FEMA. Of that, some of it can't be quite reimbursed yet until the projects are complete because they hold on to 25%. We've been getting reimbursements pretty regularly. Kim Rose, our grant person, has been submitting them often. And they have been pretty quick overall to turn them around compared to the past few years. So somebody lit a fire and we've been getting them a little bit more frequently.
All right, any other questions on fund balance and comments? Okay, so before we get to enterprise funds, we're gonna follow up on where we are. So we have a very late night and a very early morning. We had departments go back and get some of the recommendations, and we did some further cuts. So we did go back and cut dues and subscriptions, we cut travel and training, and we did cut capital expenses again. We came up with a total of $648,025 in additional cuts. This brought our deficit down to $785,475. So basically, we went from 3 cents now down to 1.6 cents, okay? And so early this morning, as we were reviewing a variety of things with our current budget, we started looking at our debt service for some loans that were taken out this year. One was Stanley White Recreation Center, and the other was for vehicle and equipment. And based on the time that we applied for those loans and received those proceeds, we had planned on making loan payments in this budget year. Well, the lender does not require us to make those payments until the next budget year. So we are going to have some extra funds for that. So that goes back into fund balance at the end of this budget year. It's going to be extremely tight, but those funds can be used to balance this budget as presented without a tax increase. So I wanted to hear your comments if you had any you'd like to make.
By not making the payment in this year's budget, versus delaying it into next year's budget, what is the longer term impact of that?
We budgeted, because of the timing of the budget, we budgeted for that payment to take place this fiscal year in FY '24. The timing of when it all came to fruition was later in the fall, by the time we closed down those loans, right? So now our payments are not due until fiscal year 2025. So we're not deferring anything. It's just that we recognize that little bit of savings in that sense for the budget.
So
Yeah.
the schedule here, the schedule just bumps out.
It just
Yeah.
adjusted.
No additional interest incurred or
No,
anything.
it was just the timing of when we actually closed down the loan. Yep.
That's correct. And so we've already budgeted for that debt service payment in the following budget year. But again, that's why I made the comment, we don't recommend any reduction in staffing positions. I cannot recommend any other cuts to the general fund budget, because it has been cut extremely tight. Now, this does not mean that we won't be sitting here having similar discussions like this next year. It really all depends on what our growth looks like over the next 12 months. But that's where we are, so I'd love to hear some additional feedback from you.
So, and I apologize for not being in yesterday, but I got a lot going on. So you were anticipating raising the taxes 3 cents, correct? Okay. So y'all went back last night and worked overtime and undertime and out the window time to cut the budget by $648,000?
Yes, and so when we started this budget process, we had about $55 million in budget requests from the departments. And over the last several months as we were going through this process, we ended up cutting over $5 million. And so we put a considerable amount of capital to begin with. We looked at the operating budget as well, and we cut that drastically to where before this cut I told you about, we were over last year's budget, we were about 2.7% increase over last year's budget. So we were very lean. This is a lean year for us. Next year is extremely lean as well. And so when we cut travel and training, what we did have to do was look at certifications on staff. A lot of our staff have to maintain a variety of certifications, so we couldn't really touch any of that. But if there was anything that was deemed to be not required, we did cut that.
So you cut travel and training, you cut what else? Can you just highlight me there?
Travel and training, dues and subscriptions, and we can cover the capital that we cut. And matter of fact, I don't think that Alderman Best has the capital that we passed out yesterday.
Oh, we did one for 5 years.
That copy.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one here.
Okay, right here.
Light blue.
This one, do we have a motion for it? I think that's.
She has.
Here. This?
No.
No, that's the picture.
I didn't see any. Okay, let me see.
Okay.
All right, so it's here.
It's
All
here.
right, okay, that's
Yeah.
all, you don't have to go back through it, as long as it's here.
Okay. And so would anyone like to know what we did cut out of capital? So,
Well, this is in addition to what you reviewed yesterday.
yeah, yes, this was included, and yes, this was on top of what we reviewed yesterday. So when we went back, we did cut the peg channel upgrades from administration. We cut 2 police cruisers from 9 down to 7. We did remove the K-9. We had a conversation with Alderman Astor, and Alderman Astor, if you'd like to make a comment about that this time.
Yeah, I think the K-9 is very important for our police department. And when I found out last night that was going to be cut, I was offered to pay, I've already paid for 1 dog for the police department. So I offered to pay out of my ARP money the $20,500, over how much it is, $20,500 out of my funds. And I would like to recommend to the board that we do that. That typically doesn't require a motion, does it? Just the approval, heads up or thumbs up?
Is there,
It's a change from the ARP funds, so it should be.
Pardon me?
Well, I think we have voted on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Those recommendations.
So I'd like to make that motion then, that $20,500 be allocated from my ARP funds to purchase the police dog, which will remove it from the capital expense as well. Unless somebody wants to share the cost with me.
Do we need a voice
So-
count or?
Well, it'd be a roll call vote, but just as a question, just making sure that
because you allocated some monies to the, pier, do you still have that
Oh, yeah.
allocation? I haven't
He does.
received,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, we'll
All right,
do a roll call.
who made the second?
I did.
Yes. Okay,
Alderman Creel,
Yeah.
Alderman Roy,
Yes.
Alderman Astor,
Yes.
Alderman Kinsey,
Yes.
Alderman Best,
Yes.
Alderman Brinson.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then when it came to fire rescue, we did cut the self-contained breathing apparatus. And we went to hear from FEMA. In Parks and Recreation, we cut the tractor mount blower. And in Public Works, we cut the shop floor scrubber. They requested a total of 3 service vehicles with work bodies. We cut one of those vehicles out. We cut the single axle dump truck out. Oh, and we cut the skid steer. Skid steer pickup broom with gutter attachment to the street department. And so,
What page is that on?
there's no pay, this is, Alderman Astor, do you remember this handout we gave you yesterday, the one with the pictures?
Yeah.
So that was on the, that was on second from last
So-
page.
Okay. I almost hate to see that thing get cut because I was watching them do a ditch in the Bern that was in such bad shape, and they're in there by hand.
Well, we did not cut the skid steer mulcher combination for
Okay,
the.
that's the piece of equipment that's so important, okay.
We did not cut that. This is one that did a lot of work on curbs and things like that.
Oh, okay.
So, and of course, we just, in this year's budget, we currently have a unit that takes care of that, so.
Good.
And of course, if anything comes up with vehicles that we've had issues with that we did not budget, we can always come back to the governing board for a budget amendment in the future.
Well, I think you've done a wonderful job, you and Kim and whoever else is involved. Done a wonderful job in getting this down to where you got it down to. And I appreciate all your hard work, all you and your staff's hard work.
Well, it is tight, there's very little cushion, so just so you're aware, but if I can at least get everyone supports this, then we will update the budget to balance it, general fund, from fund balance. And that amount coming from fund balance, instead of $580,000, that would be $1,365,475. And again, based on what I said earlier about that debt service that are not paying this year, that goes in the fund balance, and we know we've got that. It's still too early to tell how much additional fund balance we'll have, but we will have some, and so I know we'll be returning some, especially the unrestricted fund balance, and then to go with that, whatever other unrestricted fund balance we have, we would like to allocate that towards some restricted funds for future building projects and capital. So we can start building our own savings account for those things, so we don't have to continue to go out for loans each year for vehicles and capital. And if we have a big building project come up, we can at least reduce that loan size in the future. So the goal is for those accounts to build up over the years.
I see that you cut the fire engine.
Yes, we did. So the conversation that we had yesterday was we went ahead and purchased one of the fire trucks. We are waiting to hear if FEMA is going to approve the purchasing a fire truck with that, with the LPP project that we asked for, change in scope of work. And so, we hope to hear something at some point this summer or this fall about that. And then, once we hear from them, we'll come back to the board, and if they do approve that allocation, we'll go ahead and purchase the fire truck at that time. And before we continue on, let's go ahead and pass out the 5-year capital. Sent you an email earlier this morning, it was either earlier this morning or last night, about the 5-year capital plan that we have. So I wanted to give you a hard copy of this, and that shows you what the departments are requesting, not only this FY, but the next 4 years. So that's the plan that we work towards. And obviously this changes from year to year as needs occur, but you'll be able to see what those departments, that's citywide departments. And so as you look at that, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. So if there are no other questions on general fund, then we're going to start moving it. Yes, sir.
Well, I was just gonna say, when you ask for the record, still includes 2% COLA for.
Yes, it includes 2% COLA for our employees. It does not touch employee insurance. It does not reduce the number of personnel that we currently have in the general fund.
And you had mentioned the part-time employees for Stanley White Rec Center.
Yes.
Did you say 4?
4. Yes. And so originally we were looking at hiring 3 brand new full-time employees to help operate that. Remember, that's a 35,000 square foot facility. There's going to be a lot of activities going on, so we were going to have to increase our staff. In Parks and Recreation, they had several positions that had not been filled for one reason or another, literally for the last 6 months. And so I told the director, you haven't filled them, you've lost them. So one of those was a special projects coordinator, and she had some turnover with some recreation coordinators. So the special projects coordinator has been reclassified. We talked about this yesterday. That's been reclassified, and we actually pulled the names up, to a fitness coordinator. The other 2 positions have been reclassified to an enrichment coordinator, and the other one was for a recreation assistant, all based at Stanley White Recreation Center. So those are the 3 full-time positions that will be based there, plus these 4 additional positions, which will be part-time, because that facility will not be open 40 hours a week. It'll be open about 93 hours a week. And so we've got to have that part-time staff to help man the facility and the programs, as well as some of our other staff, full-time staff that will help out with that.
So there's 3 full-time, there's 4 part-time.
That's correct.
Oh, okay. Because I was like, when I looked at the budget, it's like you were only going to request 4 part-time positions.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, we knew this was going to be a tight budget, and so we did not request any new full-time positions. It was only the part-time to help with that, based on what we've seen staffing. Yes, and I said, while we're at it, we can give you an update on where things, what the fund balances are for art-related projects. So Kim, if you want to cover that.
So this report is as of April 30th. Right now we have, I'm going to go by ward. The Ward 1 has $310,000 spent, almost $320,000 encumbered, with a balance of $487,600.
And so what's remaining on that is the Hancock Street culvert, which Public Works has been working on the design, so that's in progress. And then the electronic speed limit sign, Middle and Broad Street signage, that, crosswalk and stoplights, that is gonna be going in by October, I believe, of this year. That construction's gonna start.
Ward two is $583,300 spent, about $50,000 encumbered with a balance of $487,000. And that is mostly in the sidewalks, in Pembroke for $470,000. That project has not been started.
And so we're still working with Alderman Royal on that.
And then Ward three has, $585,000 actually spent, $151,000 encumbered. I don't think this has been updated with your fishing pier just yet.
No.
That would have been May's report. And then, with a balance of $260,000. Racetrack road improvements for Ward four. We've got $22,000 spent, $1 million encumbered with an $84,000 balance of unencumbered funds. Ward five is $163,000 spent with, balance of $453,400 with East Coast Culvert and $500,000 with Northwest Stormwater projects.
With those two projects, either still in design and permitting phase.
And then Ward six has $227,000 spent, almost $45,000 encumbered with $845,000 remaining. And, the largest project on that is, still in progress, which is the Pinehurst Drive Pump Station, and then College Park drainage improvements, as well as the sidewalk dams. So right now we have, about $3 million that is a balance for art funds. I know that some of those purchase orders will grow, but we'll definitely, of this, at this point in time, we'll be rolling over $3 million into fund balance next year, and we will be assigning it to art funds.
Do you have that chart?
I can email it to you.
Okay, thank you.
We can check for a copy as well. And so if any of the aldermen that have remaining funds would like to allocate some of that toward this year's budget and to reduce the fund balance allocation, happy to have that happen.
I wish I could give you mine, $900,000, but it's a dire need for the stormwater projects.
All right, any other questions or comments on general fund?
Well, before we move on, I commend, staff and the work that you've done. You've made it very easy on this board, and it's kind of odd to position myself this way, but I think it's a mistake to not have some tax increase for this year's budget. If you're putting the blinders on and just looking at this budget, you've just made it very easy for the board to say, yes, wonderful, no tax increase. But you can't just look at this year's budget, you've got to look at what they propose or what the impact will be on the next year's budget and the budget after that. And the more you cut now, the harder it gets every year. By having at least some incremental tax increase, you're building in just a little bit of flexibility, which will go a long ways next year to avoid a lot of this discussion at that time. So I know I'm probably just preaching to the choir of one, not being myself, but to just focus on no tax increase is a mistake.
And it will get tougher next year, as we said yesterday, 66% of the general fund budget is personnel. We have had to shrink the operating expenses down, and in reality, we're as tight as we can get.
I agree with Alderman Grill, because as time goes on, like you said, you know, everybody needs to share the cost to make a difference, to continue to provide a service to the customer. And without doing that, it makes it very, very hard. And at some point in time, when you get to the end of the crossroad, you're not gonna be able to go over, because that decision wasn't made at the proper time. That's the only thing that I really look at and say, wow, we're gonna make that decision. I know it's a tough decision to make, but you have to look at if you're governing your own home. When you go to the market or go to the gas pump, you know how much gas you can put in your car, you know how far you can go with it. You have to budget yourself with it. And that's what we have to do as leaders, to make the right decision.
Please, someone sit down. I think I forgot to make one of the points here. What I was expressing in this chart as well is, right now, I stated that we are 40%, if we take ARPA funds out, our unrestricted is 40% fund balance. That's where we were at in 2018. Right there. And then this is due to FEMA, and look how much we dropped. So, not continuing to add a little bit back and build up our fund balance if we have another storm. I mean, we're looking at significantly impacting our savings.
Yeah, it can knock you out.
Yep.
Another
Yep.
storm come through.
Exactly.
And then on top of that, something else happened that would be catastrophic. You know, you really have to act on faith and know what you're doing and make the hard call. Otherwise, not only you, everyone else is going to suffer because of your decision.
So how much hurricane funds, about 3 million that we got still to receive from FEMA?
Actually, I have that one report. I think we're at 8 million.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to make a motion for 1 penny. I'd like to make a motion for 1 penny.
Is
I
that
think
motion?
that, I was gonna ask, I think a motion right now would be out of order.
You can give
We can
mid-direction.
get direction and consensus, but we're not approving the budget.
Yeah, if you would like to give direction
Yes.
on an increase.
I would like to
that-
give direction for the staff to go look at 1 penny.
That'd certainly help out in next year's budget,
Absolutely.
you know.
I mean, we got to think out the box, man. We got to make the right decision. You know, you're not making a decision you're making a decision for everybody, not just yourself. You leave that out, you know. We got to look at the day-to-day operation, like Alderman Phil said. You don't know what's gonna happen. The unknown is unknown. That's why it's called unknown.
Yeah, well, what concerns me is if we were to have another Florence, you know,
Oh, yeah.
we could be broke in a heartbeat.
So 1 penny would give us almost $500,000.
That's correct.
So do we need to get a nod with that, to give the direction?
Give directions to the manager right now.
If there's a consensus,
Is there a consensus?
Yeah, before we get to the point, is there more comment? I would like to make a comment for as tax is concerned. I worked in the tax department for over 20 years, and I know the hardship that it brings on our taxpayers. And if you look at this budget, you see how much of tax base goes to our general fund, it's what, 41%? And that's tax dollars. With me personally, the way this economy is right now, and I know we all have to stretch our budgets at home, and we gotta do what we gotta do to make it work, but, you know, I look at the broader picture here, I look at the tax base, our citizens that pay taxes, don't have this extra money like all of us sitting around this table may have. And it's a burden on taxpayers. And I just read, maybe 2 weeks ago, the state's got $1 billion they're gonna be giving back to taxpayers. So here we are, you talking about raising our taxes here, so we'll be taking that money back from them. And I personally, and all of you know, that I served with on our first term, when we had, you, Astor and Kenzie and Alderman, Mayor Odom. I was very adamant about not raising taxes. And I still hold firm to that, because we got a budget here, and Kim, Foster, all y'all, I appreciate the hard work you have done, how you dug in last night and you come up with this $640,000. I understand that and I appreciate that, but we got a budget here. We got a lot of fat in this budget that we could trim, okay? If it means that we got to go up on our taxes for our taxpayers. And I know you've trimmed it good here, and I looked at the sheet of things that you have cut. But that's just my take on it. I'm not going to, I think we can find some other way, not this year, who knows what next year may bring us. Maybe next year.
I think the problem is that, and I'm not in favor of raising taxes by no means, but it's maybe a penny this year would prevent 4 or 5 cents next year. You know, at some point in time, we've got to make some changes. You know, we've got to do something. There's a lot of construction going on, there's a lot of houses being built, but we really need some heavy industry and commercial properties to help out with this tax base.
Exactly. More
And
businesses
if you-
we get come here,
Yeah.
more tax base.
My only concern is that if we don't do maybe at least a penny this year, then next year it's going to be 5 or 6 cents, because it's only going to get worse. And I don't know, you weren't here yesterday, so with all due respect, we went through this budget with a fine-tooth comb, the general fund, and we cut every little thing in there we could find. You know, at some point in time, we were down to raise taxes or cut services. Now, I don't, what's a penny gonna cost the homeowner?
That's what she's got 1.6 on here, but I'm gonna have her.
So at 1 cent for a $350,000 home, it would be $35 per year added. For the $200,000 home, it'd be $20. For a $100,000 home, it'd be $10.
But my thing is, again, when you provide a service, you provide it with the best of your ability. You don't want to start taking shortcuts and saying, well, we're not going to pick up this week because we don't have enough staff to do it with. So you're going to leave that, and then something else can happen. The truck can break down, and you don't have money to get it fixed. So you can't come back the next week to pick it up. So why waste time to say, I'm going to get it tomorrow? Do what you can do today to make it happen. When you go to pump gas, they don't care how much money you got, as long as you can pay for what you pump. When you order groceries and you got to take your medication, that's not considered. You got to pay your way in order to go through life. It's not fair for some. What we have to do, what we got to do. It's not trying to hurt nobody. You know, it's just that we have a business to run. This is a business you have to run to serve the people. And you can't keep pushing it back. You know, if your roof is leaking, you can't put a tarp up there for the day and hope that, you know, somebody bless you with a new roof. You know, you got to make some kind of way to get that thing fixed before it becomes a real serious problem.
So yesterday, I was the only alderman not here, correct? So you had 6 aldermen here. So how many was for raising the taxes and how many was for not?
We didn't do that.
You didn't give any opinions or whether you,
We did a little bit, but it was only 2, I think. Was it 2?
Mayor-
It was
Mayor
just
and I
2.
both went on record as not raising.
Yeah, just 2.
Well, and let me just bring it up, and Alderman Brinson, I'll pick on you, and Alderman Best, I'll pick on you. Every year, last year, Alderman Brinson, you took the position of no tax increase, along with the mayor. Alderman Best, I don't recall what your position exactly was last year, but can you explain to me how each year you can stand by a position of no tax increase? When you see your budget, and you see the levels of increase that are happening all around us, whether it be for healthcare, insurances, fuel, just repair costs, whatever it is, you see some significant increases happening every year. You have staffing needs. You have to rely on the staff that provides the services that the community has come to expect and want. How do you justify these ever-increasing costs with no tax increase every year? I know that it doesn't work. It comes to a breaking point, but I'd like to hear from each of you, since both of you seem to be adamant about no tax increase. How does that work year after year after year?
Just like it did last night.
I'm sorry?
Just like it did last night. Staff went back and trimmed it and found some money in the general fund.
Half of what was being proposed. The other half was just I don't want to call it a gimmick, it's just
Right.
something that was there that could be done with no financial impact.
Right.
So that, you don't have that every year.
I understand that.
So-
But we do have either, and New Bern has growth for many years now.
And it's not enough to cover the
That is
increased costs that
anticipated
we're
this year.
facing.
And so you're eventually gonna have to cut service, just like you said yesterday. And thankfully, we can avoid that this year.
And what service do you want to cut?
I don't have to cut any services based on.
I'm talking about next year.
That's next year's problem.
Well, but chances are, Alderman Brinson, you're not going to be on the board next year. So
We'll see.
you're passing the buck on to somebody else. You're kicking that can down the road. And quite honestly, I think you're doing it for political reasons as opposed to in service to the community. And that may come across as being a little harsh, but there is a reality to that.
It's next year's problem. And I have not raised, like I said, I am not raising taxes on, the same comment I made last year, on our most vulnerable population, whose revaluations doubled in some cases. And the inflation that Alderman Kinsey is talking about, the money is going other places. We have raised rates in all of our other enterprise funds, and we haven't had the discussion yet on electric. So I don't appreciate being lectured about the general fund when we haven't even covered the enterprise funds, which we did raise last year, and one we will probably raise this year. So taking it in total as a taxpayer bill, there are a lot of other bills that have to be paid.
So we were looking at giving direction to staff for the 1 cent. We did get the information here for the penny. So what direction do we want to give the staff now? Do we need to look at the 1 cent and get approval for that to move forward, or where are we?
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, you should count those. Who would approve a
Okay.
1 cent, and then that's the consensus.
All right, well, let's do that then. City clerk, volunteer. We're going to, then we need to go back to a motion to do that?
Yes, a
We only-
motion.
Yeah,
Just
motion
count,
is just
just
direction.
count, okay. All right, for direction, then we'll just do a count.
Okay, Alderman Freel,
I could support a 1 cent increase.
Lloyd,
Yes.
Alderman Astor,
I can support a 1 cent.
Alderman Kennedy,
I can support a 1 cent.
Alderman Best,
No.
Alderman Brinson. Yeah,
So-
majority.
Staff has direction.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to go ahead into enterprise funds. So at this time, I'd like to ask Charlie Bouchard to come up.
Charlie.
This one?
Yes. Thanks.
Do we have a count for that, Mr. Hughes,
We do not.
for enterprise?
He's going to do a presentation before we get into the budget.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me the time to talk about this very important matter for the electric utility as well as our customers. Some things keep me up at night, and these are the things that keep me up at night about the electric utility. How do we provide essential electric service that's safe, affordable, reliable, and resilient? How do we protect our investment in the electric utility? How do we ensure the electric utility is financially healthy? I spent a lot of time and energy thinking about these things. And given my concerns, I found it necessary to perform an electric utility financial study. And after we do the financial study, I thought it would be worthwhile to consider the findings of that electrical study, of that financial study. So I hired Utility Financial Solutions to be with us today and report the results on what they were hired to do. Utility Financial Solutions, very highly respected consulting company that specifically works in utility rate design, utility financial information, respected all over the country. We're lucky to have them as consultants. And I'd like for them, after I get through some introductions, to come up and talk about the findings of the report. And when I sat down with Utility Financial Solutions, I asked them to help me determine our projected revenues, not only this year, but going forward. I think it's very, very important that we have at least a 3 to 5 year plan on the financial health of the utility. I also asked them to develop a 3-year rate plan with revenue requirements and design the rates supporting those revenue requirements. And those rates supporting the revenue requirements would include both operating capital revenue requirements as well as a variable power supply costs. So what are revenue requirements? I kind of put them in 2 different categories, fixed and variable. Those that are financial experts in the room, you may take exception to some of my comments coming from an engineer. words may be a little misplaced, but I'll try to lead you through what I think are fixed. And these are items we must pay, like our power supply. We don't have a choice. It's not an option. It's 60% of all of our costs to operate the utility. And there's variable components inside that power supply. And there's contractual components inside that power supply that sales. They're pretty much flat. They vary with weather, so sales are up when temperatures are warm, hot, and temperatures are cold, sales are up. Other than that, sales are very, very neutral. It's also influenced by our territory. And it's really, really hard to grow sales for our business, for our industry. We have to bring on 600 to 700 new homes to make the revenue move $1 million. So our sales are fixed. Our cash balance, you'll hear more about this later in the utility financial solution presentation, but it's declining. We have a policy. The policy is fixed. We have to respond to our policy. General fund, contributions to the general fund have been increasing historically, and debt service, that's something else we must pay. It's increasing, and it's a fixed amount by our contractual requirements. Also, fixed requirements that I consider mandates that we have on the utility, and they're increasing. Safety. We can't ignore safety standards. Safety standards are being improved on a daily basis. We can't ignore training and education for our employees and our operators of this power system. NCDOT, relocating all of our utilities to respond to highway projects that we're bringing into town. Can't say no to that. Broadband service providers coming through our town. We have to respond to them. They have a right to be here. They have a right to be on our poles. They have a right to be in our easement. It's a cost to the utility. There's not much I can do about it other than respond to it and pay to allow them to exist on our poles. With all that construction, our utility locates, the cost of those are driven up. Right now, they're about 4 times they were 6 years ago. Our labor and benefits are increasing as we grow the system. As the system grows, we must have staff to cover the expanded territory, the additional customers that we must serve, and inflation plays its toll on labor and benefits, as well as all of other aspects of our business. We've seen inflation rates 18 to 900%. 900% being on the transformers, underground transformers. We've talked about that before. Variable components to our revenue requirements, severe weather. How do we respond to severe weather events? We might roll out the grade A hurricane plan and get everybody back on duty quick, or we could make a decision not to do that. We could slow it down. We could not spend money on that. Same thing with outages and outage detection, isolating our outages and responding to those two events. Take a 2 o'clock in the morning outage. We don't have to call a guy in. If we don't want to spend those overtime dollars, we can wait until morning, until staff gets here, and then we can respond to it. So these are things that we have some choices with. Meter accuracy, billing. We've made huge improvements in those areas over the last 6 years. Put a lot of time and money and energy into it. I think our customers like it. But we could back off of it. We could not be so concerned with how much time and energy we spend on metering and billing. Customer service is another one. We continue to have walk-in service, multiple payment options. Cashiering costs money. Cashiering is expensive. All those different payment options that we offer our customers require additional staff to manage those. There's a cost to doing that. Customer engagement activities, we can back off with Monfest, and Bern 101, and safety awareness that we have to do for the community. we participate in. And those are all kind of variable. We have some decision-making ability in that. Other variable revenue requirements, system age, and its useful life. How much preventive maintenance do we do or not do? Should we just wait until the pole falls down and then respond to it? Or should we be proactive in trying to maintain the system so we keep our customers on and not be quite as reactive? Roads. Our line extension policies on new collecting. What we decided there was a 3-year revenue credit. And based on that, we get a little bit of money up front, but overall, what I'm seeing on the line extensions I'm doing is a 7 to 10-year payback before the utility receives any money. After the house is sold, the customer moves in, 7 to 10 years. And we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on line extension agreements. Wire going into the ground, build these new neighborhoods. Territorial expansion. The bigger our territory gets, the more labor, the more material, the more equipment we need. We could say no to it, I guess, and stop expanding with the loads that are coming to New Bern. System capacity, you've heard me talk about it before. We could ignore that. And we could not invest, make decisions not to invest in capacity to serve our customers. But we have been continuing to invest there, and our customers seem to enjoy that and expect that. Labor, we need qualified labor, we need succession planning, we need experienced labor, they need to be trained, they need to be retainable, and there's pressures in the market. And that's a variable, how we react to that, how we invest in our staff and our labor. Those are decisions that we control. Some other variable forecasted pressures that I'm seeing in the industry, seeing in New Bern on this utility weather events. I don't know what they're going to do. We have to be ready to respond. Severe weather events, catastrophic weather events. Tomorrow's thunderstorm that I have to bring in my entire staff at 2 o'clock in the morning, pay them overtime. Don't know what that's going to bring. Right. We need to be prepared for that. We'll talk about it a little bit more. Later on in this discussion, we do have declining cash reserves. That's putting pressure on the utility. We have increase in power supply costs, putting pressure on the utility. And our system age. In responding to our system age, I would say we'll have to increase capital spending. With that system age becomes, I'll explain this, our ability to avoid costs in our power supply decrease. As our generation gets older and older, and it's 20 years old now, beyond its useful life, I have a harder time running that generation to avoid the cost. Contractually, I'm allowed to run 18 megawatts of generation. It's worth about $4.7 million a year in avoided costs. We get about half of it now because of the age of our system. And it's going to decrease as generators fail to start. We have a hard time running them. And our distribution system. Parts of it are over 50 years old, so it requires constant repair. So that's good. You have to have the money to do that. Other pressures, reliability, resiliency, contingency plans. Our customer expectation is for a reliable and resilient system. They like that. That's something that they want. They want to pay for it. Presently, we cannot support N-1 contingencies. And what I mean by that is I don't have any more than one contingency. So given the right condition, and you take one of my contingencies away, we're out of power for a while. And we just came really close to that this winter. I lost one of 3 transformers at Glen Burnie substation. Got it back in about 2 weeks ago. It's 50 years old. If that happens when we're at peak loading conditions, basically it's generally temperature driven, we'll have to plead for load shedding to our customers. We can't carry that load. Other things that are impacting utility mandates, carbon reduction is coming, it's coming. Duke's all over it. I hear rumors in the state. What that means is higher costs on fuel. EV charging is going to put pressure on us, probably most likely on the capacity side, where somebody wants to bring in 2 more EV cars to their garage, and now my transformer at curbside is overloaded. And I can't charge them for that. The utility has to respond and change that transformer out to serve that customer. The GRIP grant, as you well know, I applied for that. We're going to require a $13 million match. I'm hoping that I can account for a lot of that $13 million with our in-kind labor and equipment. But realistically, I think that's probably aggressive. So we probably need to be in a position where we can borrow $13 million. Power up grant, same thing. I'm making an application for that one. It's $1 million with a $333,000 match. We need to be prepared to spend that money and provide that contribution. So with that said, I'd like to introduce Utility Financial Solutions to discuss their financial report, and then we'll go into, based on the results of that report, obviously a rate recommendation plan that you can consider. Ron, would you like to come up? This is Don Lund.
All right, Carolyn, how do I get my presentation up there?
Ask me.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for allowing us to present to you today. I'm Dawn Lund. I'm Vice President of Utility Financial Solutions, and we do cost of service studies, financial plans, and rate designs for utilities across the country, Guam, and the Caribbean. We also teach for American Public Power Association cost of service study, financial planning courses. We also speak at joint action agencies across the country, including electricities. So we were hired to look at the electric department and perform a financial projection. What a financial projection actually does is it looks at where you are financially today and where you're moving into the future. But what I did want to talk about a little bit about is your history. You guys have not had a rate increase in 7 years, and in fact, the 4 rate changes prior to that were rate decreases. What happened is about 9 years ago, electric cities lowered the wholesale power costs. Some debt was paid off on their side. You guys responded by having rate decreases to match the reduction in power supply expenses. So this occurred starting off with a rate decrease of 3% in 2015. You followed up with a 12% decrease in September of 2015, followed by 2 other small rate increases in 2016 and 2017. So that's where you are historically. The last 9 years, you have not had rate increases, and again, you have rate decreases. But what's happened in the last 9 years since that time? We have had this chart, what this chart is showing you here. This is the cost per kilowatt hour. You can see that at one time in 2014, we were almost at 10 cents for wholesale power supply. These are the rate decreases that I'm talking about, that I talked about. This grayed out area was your rate decrease period. You can see since that time, 2018, the cost per kilowatt hour for power supply has actually increased. During this time, again, you have not had any rate increases, and this is just on the power supply side. So what we can see from the chart here is that your costs per kilowatt hour for power supply alone have increased since the end of your decreased rate period. In addition, this chart actually shows the orange is all your power supply, this orange line here, and all this fill-in is your power supply. Your power supply costs are about 70% of your overall budget for the electric department. The yellow area here is all other costs besides power supply. The green line is actually your revenues during that period. So what you can see is the margin from the end of your rate decrease period to now has gotten smaller. What is causing that is the increase per kilowatt hour in the power supply and also the increase in all other expenses. During this same period from 2018, just general numbers, not cumulative, simple math, inflation has increased about 21%. Your costs during that same period for all other and all over electric budget has increased about almost 20%. So you're slightly under inflation, but you're tracking very closely to inflation. So what you're seeing here is right now the utility has been operating, is projected to operate at a loss. And so our plan is to hopefully look at key targets, things like operating income, cash balances, and debt coverage ratio, and make a plan to slowly turn that around. The next slide that I'm going to show you is not the plan we are recommending. I'm going to preface that right now. What I'm trying to show you next is what would happen if we fully met our revenue requirements according to prudent financial planning. When we look at your key financial targets, what would it take next year to turn it around? That's not what I'm recommending. I'm recommending a slower, more incremental approach. But I do want to put in perspective a little bit of where we are today. Actually, before we get to that slide, I do want to point out, let's go back to this here. I kind of anticipated questions of what has been increasing here. In the all other category, I've already shown you that power supply costs on a per kilowatt hour have been increasing, but your other costs have been increasing as well. There's 4 key areas that have been increasing. All of your expenses obviously have been increasing, but these are the 4 that jumped out at me. The top 3 everybody is facing. The top one shows salaries and expenses for the electric administration department increasing. The second item there is the electric distribution salaries, most likely line workers. This is actually happening across the country. It is getting harder and harder to retain and replace and attract talented workers in the electric utility and the utilities industry in general. So it's more and more important to be making sure you're paying them competitively. My understanding is this was done on a wage salary, these wage increases. So we want to make sure we're competitive with our wages, that we're training our employees, and that we keep them passionate about what they do for their skills, because it's harder and harder to replace them, and skilled utility workers are actually being recruited away from utilities across the country. So these are very important line items that we are actually seeing across the country increase. This line here is your materials and supplies. We've seen this is actually your materials and supplies have increased about 4-fold since 2020. That's directly, mainly due to inflation. We're seeing some areas, I think gas and oil will triple, up into the 900% Charlie had on his slide earlier. So that line item is directly related to inflationary measures. The 4th item here is the transfer to the city. That has increased about 17% since 2020. So these 4 line items, of course, the budget in all and expenses in all have been affected. Every line item by some sort of inflationary number. But these items are the area that have been, that jumped out at me that I thought I might anticipate some questions on what has made that yellow portion that I showed earlier increase. Before I go on to the next slide, which is going to show you where we would need to go today to meet all key requirements, and again, I'm not recommending jumping to that first stage. Do I have any questions? Do you guys have any questions on anything you've seen so far? I'll take questions also throughout and at the end. So this is actually your cash balance. I want to review this first. Your cash balance, I want to review what this blue chart here is where your rate period decreases ended. And at that time, your cash balance was right about exactly what we would recommend your cash balance to be. This top line here is your minimum cash that we recommend according to key financial targets in the electric utility. The things we look at are your O&M expenses. I want you to be able to pay your bills. I look at historical investment in the system. If you have an ice storm, windstorm, whatever it may be, I want you to be able to get the system up and running to keep the service reliable to your customers. I look at debt service payments. I want you to be able to always pay your debt service payment. And your capital improvement program. If you tell me you're going to spend $1 million, for example, next year, I want you to have $1 million to begin that at the beginning of the construction season. So when I say that I want you to hold, and this chart here is about $19 million minimum, that's to cover the risks unique to the New Bern electric utility. Your current cash reserve policy is at about 15 million. And you can see the line there is showing that at the end of your rate decrease period, you were about right at the minimum we recommend. And since that time, due to all the things that we've covered, your cash balance has dropped significantly. And you're sitting at about $12.5 million today under your current cash reserve policy. You do see a little blip here. I wanted to point that out. This little blip, you'll see it on the revenue side and you'll see it on the cash side. That was some back billing for some billing errors. That was unique, a one-time thing. You're not going to see that blip in the future. That certainly would actually be a much faster slope there. So cash balances are decreasing. And again, that's a function of mainly increased power supply expenses and increased expenses in general. I want to talk a little bit about age of your system. We look at, just as an accountant or a finance person, I look at age of your system. If your system is much under 50% depreciated, if you don't have at least 50% of your net book value remaining, I would expect your capital improvement program to be much more aggressive. You should be reinvesting in the system at about the rate we depreciate. If we don't keep reinvesting in the system, our system's aging, it affects reliability. And the need for a rate increase, the need for reinvestment in the system doesn't go away. It only compounds. If you need some capital improvements today you're not pushing through, it doesn't go away because you pushed it down the road. It only compounds. So right now, in 2018, at the end of your rate decrease period, your system was about 45% remaining net book value. Today, you're sitting at about 39%. We would consider anything under 50% starting to be maybe looked at to be an aging system, and I would expect your capital improvement program to be much more aggressive to get the system back to at least 50% appreciated or less. So this is that cash reserve policy I was talking about. In case you had any questions specifically on that, again, I look at risks unique to the electric utility. And again, we recommend holding at least $19 million, and you have about $12.5 million today. So this is a table showing you if you guys did absolutely nothing. If you guys decided, we're not going to have a rate increase, where would you be financially today and into the future? You're currently, the last two audits showed you were operating at losses. Those losses would continue, obviously, if you did nothing today. Your losses would continue to grow. Your cash balance would turn negative, and of course, you wouldn't meet your debt coverage ratio. This is if you did nothing today. I'm going to show you the next slide where what would it take to turn this around in one rate increase. We are not recommending that. We are recommending slow incremental rate increases to meet financial targets, but I want to give you an idea of where you are at financially today. If we were to fully meet our operating revenue requirements, which means I'm meeting all my expenses, I'm meeting a proper rate of return, which is a break-even rate of return for municipal utility. You would need at least an 18% rate increase, followed by some inflationary type increases after that. Obviously, I can tell from sitting here listening today, you guys have had a couple long, hard days. You are financially savvy, and you care for your customers. You care for your community. So we're trying to put together a plan to balance that. What can we do to change these targets, work to more financially prudent targets, but yet keep our increase as low impact on our customer that we can. So the plan that we put together is 5% rate increases over the next 3 years, and after that, some inflationary type increases thereafter. As your costs increase, obviously we need to keep up with those increases. The reason you're faced with larger increases today is, keep in mind, you haven't had a rate increase or a rate change in over 9 years, while costs have increased greatly. And prior to that, you had some rate decreases. What this plan does is it actually doesn't even fully fund revenue requirements. Let's talk about that real quickly. You've been talking about the general fund the last couple days. What an enterprise fund does is it's run almost like a business. It provides a service, and it should be recouping and covering the revenues from that enterprise fund, should be recouping its own expenses, its capital, and its debt payments. So we need to make sure we're keeping it healthy to keep providing those services. So you can see a 5% rate increase here. Actually, I'm almost covering my losses. I actually want your operating income to be closer to about $2.5 million and up to $3 million, which you can see I've worked you over that projection period. But what I look at is I try to balance these 3 key targets: operating income, projected cash balances, and my debt coverage ratio. I want to make sure you're always meeting your debt coverage ratio. All debt coverage ratio is the amount, did I cash flow enough in each year to pay my debt service payment at least one time? Anything over a 1 shows you how much you've cash flowed to pay your debt service payment. Your debt coverage ratios are probably at least a 1.25. For financial planning purposes, I like you to meet at least a 1.5 minimum or greater. Your cash balances, you can see, slowly get you up to the minimum. That's only, that $20 million right there is only 120 days cash on hand. Highly rated bond utilities like to see at least 200 days of cash on hand. So that is a minimum I want you to hold, and that's even on the lower end. You guys are looking at possibly bonding in the electric utility. These targets are important. The number 1 target right here is debt coverage ratio, which we got you healthy. Days cash on hand, highly rated bond utilities, bond rating agencies will look at 200 days plus. Days cash on hand doesn't give you a higher rating in isolation, but it is one piece that helps. So it's important that we get that up to the minimum. And again, that's only 120 days. Operating income, obviously you're operating still at very small losses the first couple years, and you work up to your minimum rate of return. That's not a rate of return that an investor-owned utility enjoys. This is a very small, I think a little over 3% rate of return that recoups 2 things. One is interest expense on debt, because it's below the operating income line, and 2 is the inflationary increase on the assets I have invested in the system. And what do I mean by that? If I buy $1 million asset today, it's going to cost me $1.3 million in the future, and I'm trying to recoup that inflationary increase so I can replace assets in the future. So this rate track, just the pure 5% is about $6 a month to the average residential customer. Chris is going to come up here and talk about something called a power cost adjustment. A power cost adjustment is the number 1 policy utilities can put through today to protect their changes in operating expenses. You here at New Bern, your electric expenses are about 70% of your cost. You can mitigate changes in 70% of your cost changes by having a PCA. We are doing emergency PCAs across the country. Power supply costs are extremely volatile. And those that do not have a power cost adjustment policy in place have seen their cash balances drop very rapidly. So Chris is going to talk about a power cost adjustment, what that means, and how that would supplement a rate plan and protect changes in the future. Having a PCA really, again, mitigates about 70% of your changes in your operating budget, and it really lets the board concentrate on the things that are in their control, and it, in general, keeps base rate adjustments much lower. Right now, in a sense, you're playing catch-up with these rate changes, and we're just trying to put a slow incremental plan in to get you where you need to be financially. Before I turn it over to Chris, do you guys have any questions? I'm obviously going to stick around. Chris is going to come up and talk about a power cost adjustment and the actual rate design for the customer and what does 5% mean to them, and 5% mean on a dollar basis. But are there any questions before he gets up and talks about that?
Yeah, I'll ask a question. I apologize for being late. I had to welcome a group down at the Doubletree. I haven't heard you talk about our debt relief that's coming next year. Where is that captured in your presentation?
Great question. So if you see this, so there's two things that are happening right here. One is it's kind of blended in here that you probably can't see because I show borrowing in there at the same time. So if you're talking about a debt schedule that it falls off and you're finished paying for that, that's going to fall in this line right here. But what's kind of sheltering that or hiding that, if you will, is the bond that we have projected. The capital improvement program that we have projected here, we have put in $20 million in grant funds in anticipation of receiving that. Of course, you're not guaranteed to receive that. I do want to mention real briefly, so that's a good question because I want to talk a little bit about concentrating on that capital. You have two capital improvement projects there that are more aggressive. One is for capacity and one is for the fleet
Generation and transformation.
that Charlie talked about earlier. So we have here two bond issues to help support that capital improvement program. The grant funds you can see there, if you do not get those grant funds, what would happen is that capital improvement program would just smooth out. So the rate track wouldn't change under that scenario. And in case any of you are sitting there saying, okay, that's a aggressive capital improvement program that's really driving this rate increase, so to speak, and the debt is driving this rate increase, if you removed all of that capital and only spent $3.5 million a year, which is your typical spending that you have spent historically, that rate increase could drop to 4%. So you might be saying, how can we remove that many millions of dollars and only affect our rate increase by 1%? Well, it's the concept of, we're borrowing for that, we're spreading that prepayment back over time, over the life of that asset. So again, we're playing catch up with this rate increase, and melting into that, obviously, our capital improvement program and other costs like that. Charlie, do you have something to add to that?
I was going to try to add some clarity to the next question. And
Okay.
the rate, what we call rate adjustment, is focused on operating and capital expenses. What you're going to hear next in the PCA, the power cost adjustment chart, is collecting our power supply expenses that our rates are not capturing. Inside that discussion of the power supply cost adjustment, you will see the consideration towards debt service coming on in 2020, July of 2025. That answers your question.
Because that debt service is not called out as debt service on our financials. It's in our operating power bill we get from electricities every month, correct?
That's true, but I think what we're going to try to explain here shortly is that our current rates are not recovering all of our power supply
I know that, and it wasn't intended to until the debt service is satisfied next year. Middle of 2025 was always the goal that we were trying to reach, because that's when, how much comes off every month or however?
About $280,000.
It's almost $300,000 a month. I'm trying to figure out where in the projected expenses have you captured that?
I'm in the power supply.
You will see that in the, under power
Yes.
supply expense. And you will see how that will be kind of automatic in the future when Chris talks about the power cost adjustment, which you currently don't have, that we're recommending you implement with this plan. I apologize, I thought you meant
Sorry,
revenue
yeah,
funds falling
it's
off.
confusing because it's not
Yeah.
listed as
The
debt
pa-
service.
Your debt comes through power supply and it's shown as an operating expense, and that falls off through your power supply expenses. Any other questions?
Yes, I have one question.
Sure.
You had mentioned condition of the equipment and that the savings, we have like, I think you said 12 million in there, we should have maybe 18 million in the,
In your cash reserves.
yes, for the system that we have now. What is, from what you have seen and understand, where are we with our equipment now and being ahead of the game?
So just to give you a little clarity, I'm definitely not an engineer, but all I do from looking at a balance sheet is look at the age of the system. And I can tell you where utility typically falls and what indicators usually make that capital improvement program go up in the future. Again, you're at 30, you only have a remaining net book value of about 39%. Meaning you've depreciated 61% of your value in assets. Given the age of that, just from an accounting standpoint, looking at that, I would expect your capital improvement program to be much more aggressive in the future in order to be able to bring that net book value, so we have at least 50% of our remaining net book value. Where do I see utilities across the country? I see them all over the board. In general, I see utilities that are depreciated 40 to 60%, which we like that to be at least 50% or below for depreciated. You're 61% depreciated currently.
That's what we are, 61.
Percent depreciated, yes, currently. You have a remaining 39% net book value.
Okay.
And from the engineer's perspective, my capital plan and my assessment of the system over the last 6 years is very capital intensive. Without even knowing this information, that's my perspective, that it's old, it needs repair, it needs more money invested into it. And based on this financial report, my assessment matches with the finance folks are saying it's an old system. So it's kind of a good sanity check that we're both not far off on each other.
So within the next 6 years or so, we'll be looking at purchasing another piece of equipment. Is that what you're saying?
Every year.
Okay.
Well, Charlie, can I just put it in the simplest terms possible? We have an aging infrastructure in our electric utility, and we're behind the 8 ball now. And before it just runs itself into the ground, we have to become more aggressive in updating that infrastructure. Is that a simple way of putting the state of our electric utility?
I would agree with you now. That's what I'm trying to get across.
We have to get more aggressive in replacing our aging infrastructure. It's that simple.
And collecting the revenues required to do that.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Chris has a few slides to talk about PCA and the actual rate design. Any questions for me?
While he's coming, I have one question for Mr. Sean. You made mention that the line extensions was costing hundreds of thousands of dollars and will not recouping for 7 or 8 years before we see any benefit from those line extensions. Why is it taking such a long time?
That's what, that's the way the policy operates. We give a 3-year revenue credit based on the total construction cost. And only the difference the customer pays. We only recoup a very small amount of total cost. That was a policy that we adopted, we actually revised it 2 years ago.
And who is the we? The boards?
The board. Yes, ma'am. Based on pressure from developers. That is how we responded to it. And of those line extensions that I've done over the last 2 years, I look at the return on the investment, and it's about 7 to 10 years. Not every development is the same. They all don't have the same density. They're not all apples to apples, but pretty consistent pattern, 7 to 10 years before we receive any money back. And that's 7 to 10 years from when the house is sold and somebody plugs something into the wall and is done with it. Before we get a start getting. It's a little different on the tax-based side when we develop properties in the city. But when we get your revenue right away on the taxes on the utility side, I have to put hundreds of thousands of dollars into the system before I get anything back. So it's a different model. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Lund. I'm with Utility Financial Solutions. And as Dawn and Charlie so eloquently described and pointed out and walked you all through, we have tremendous cost pressures from a variety of sources. One being power supply, which again is the cost to get power to your town doorstep, so to speak, or at your substation to distribute to your town. That represents roughly 70% of your total annual expenditures in the electric department. So we want to talk about one mechanism that we have many utilities implementing or have already implemented across the country called the power cost adjustment. So with a power cost adjustment, let me back up one moment. Your base rates have a certain amount of power supply cost recovery built into those base rates. So for the time period that you have the same base rates and you don't change your rates, as power supply costs change, you're needing to absorb that cost differential. So what a power cost adjustment mechanism does is it tracks all of those power supply costs. And it says, if costs usually are 8 cents a kilowatt hour, and now they go up to 8.5 cents, I better recoup that additional ½ cent. So the piece of the PCA becomes that ½ cent. So it's basically a fuel adder, if you will. This is a very common concept in the trucking industry, maybe where they base their deliveries on a certain cost per gallon of fuel, and then they'll have a fuel adder if fuel goes above that cost they have built into their base rates. So we're basically saying your base rates recover a certain amount of your power cost, and as power costs fluctuate, we're going to want to track that and pass that through in a real-time basis to your customers so you keep up with your changing expenses related to power costs. Now, the way we recommend that you do that is on something that we call a 12-month rolling average. And what does that really mean? It means that we try to take a more smooth average of power cost changes so we don't jump your customer's bill around as much on a month-to-month basis. So as power costs are trending upward, as they have the last 9 years, we would slowly see that PCA creeping up to keep pace with those increasing power costs. So that's actually tracked and then passed through on a per kilowatt hour basis on your customer's bill. This is a simple basic illustration of that. Again, as I mentioned, let's assume that your base rates are recouping 8 cents per kilowatt hour in your base rates, and that over time we track that, well, now power costs are ½ cent more, costing you somewhere near 8.5 cents. That PCA or that power cost or additional charge on the customer's bill would be that ½ cent. These are a couple graphical illustrations of, this is an attempt to show you on the left side what's happening with your under recovery currently without a PCA. And the right side is showing you if you had a PCA, what your power cost recovery would how it actually would have performed. So on the left side, this middle line here is representing the PCA, meaning what is the charge that your customers pay on their bill if you had a PCA. Notice that that's flatlined at 0 right now on this left chart, because this is simulating that you don't have a PCA. The top line that's going up and down are your monthly power supply costs. You can see on a monthly basis that your power costs are going up and down for a variety of factors. But you can see in general, they're slowly trending upward. The green line is showing your cumulative recovery for power supply through your current rates. And you can see, since you don't have a power cost adjustment, that you're slowly and incrementally under recovering through your rates on your power costs. You're basically not recouping enough for your power costs. We predict in the last 33 months, on average, you've under recovered by the tune of about $45,000 per month that you've under recovered, meaning you paid the bill, but you haven't collected it from your customer yet. And again, it all ties back to your financial situation where we're seeing your cash balances decline, and we're seeing the last 2 years you're operating in the negative. And again, even under our plan, we're predicting that you'll still be operating in the negative for the next 2 years as well. So the plan that we described with those 3 years of 5% assumed that we would implement a PCA methodology. So on the right side here, you can see again the orange line is your PCA. You can see it does do a little movement because that's the charge to the customer on that incremental half-cent example. You can see we try to take that average so it keeps it somewhat flat and smooth and consistent to the customer. But yet, as we have those increasing power costs, we try to keep that green line as close to 0 as possible. So we try to make it stay at break even, so that between your base customer charges and your PCA, you're trying to stay whole with your power supply costs. I then wanted to show a chart or data in terms of where do we see the actual customer bill changing. So we wanted to show you under your current rates, if you did nothing, what is the customer currently paying? And if you do follow our recommended plan here to do those 3 years of 5% as well as the PCA, what would that mean to the customer's bill? So we generally like to focus on the residential side because that's typically the most important thing to most communities. We have done a similar analysis with each and every one of your different customer rates, so we have that data available. But I did want to focus on the residential bill. So you can see currently your average residential customer pays $120.04 before taxes on their bill for their energy usage, and we're predicting that under this 5% plan, as well as implementing this PCA that we're recommending, next year's bill would be $134.10 per month. So just under $14.07 additional per month for the average residential bill. Of that $14.07, you can see there $7.91 of it is due to that PCA. We're catching up, we're keeping you whole with your actual increase in power costs. And roughly $6, just over $6.16 to be exact, is the estimated additional cost as far as getting that 5% base rate increase. So you can see we look forward out into the 3 years of those 5% progressions, also again layering in that PCA. And you can see over the 3-year period, we get up to a total average annual bill of $147.29, so it incrementally goes up somewhere in the neighborhood of $6 to $7 per month each consecutive year.
And I would just like to clarify, if I can I know what you
Absolutely.
In the year, as you can see, the PCA is constant across all years because of modeling. And we really actually need real-time power costs to do a better job of predicting them now. So we just put up a flat, constant kind of a worst-case scenario for the PCA. But to the mayor's point, in year 2026, when debt service comes up, that PCA will then go down. It will track our power supply costs. So when the debt service comes off our bill, the $300,000 a month, the next month, it's reflected in the PCA cost, and that comes down. So this isn't a true model example with as the way the PCA is performing. I just wanted to make sure that cleared that up. I had to get something up there to try to communicate this, and I thought I should probably look forward on trying to model the PCA on years that we don't know what the actual power supply costs.
Does this take into account the electricity's true up or not?
Correct. And so that 0.81 is really close to what the monthly true up would be from electricity. It's included in that.
What number did you say again?
The PCA,
Oh, okay, the PCA.
8.1 tenths
Okay.
cents of 8.1 cents of a kilowatt hour.
Just under a penny.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
And that is factored into that.
So we did our best effort to consider those additional riders in that calculation.
Thank you, Chris.
Yep. So with that, I'd like to invite Charlie back up to
Yeah, if you allow me, I
wrap things
have a
up.
few closing comments.
Thank you.
Charlie, before you leave that, could you go back to her slide that showed the projections without the rate increase?
I have to go forward now.
That one. So the projected expenses, and I don't know if this is a question for you or her, what is included? Is that all of our expenses to operate utility?
Yes, Don?
Yes,
Can you add
that's
to that?
everything that you look at in your trial balance that hits the electric utility as an expense would be included in there.
Okay, so what assumption did you use for projected revenue increases year over year?
Projected revenue, no growth, there's zero growth in here.
Okay.
If you see that cost per kilowatt hour chart that went up, the power supply was increasing but more relatively stable, but sales, due to energy efficiencies and distributed energy resources in general are going down. So we're very conservative when we project growth.
Okay, so here, I'll go back to my first question. So under the projected expenses, that includes our wholesale power bill that we get from electricity. So what is driving the projected expenses to grow year over year when we're going to be saving $3.5 million a year, starting in 2026, actually starting in the middle of 2025?
So this particular, you see the 2026, the 57 million drops right there. It's all your other expenses. You've got all other expenses that are increasing. Those four that I showed you alone have increased, I think it was $6 million. We can flip to that slide, $6 million just since 2020. You have other costs that are increasing.
So I just want to be sure you have captured the $3.5 million in savings from electricity in that projection.
You can see it right here.
Yes, it's in there.
And that little red tab just tells us that note there.
Okay.
Your recommended rate proposal includes the PCA.
So, can I get my hands over here? So let's go to that slide right here. This recommended proposal right here includes a 5% increase plus the PCA
Right.
methodology.
So without a PCA, what would we be looking at?
Excellent question. These rate increases would be 7.9, basically 8% for the next 3 years without a PCA. Awesome question.
So kind
And-
of being forced into having to accept a PCA.
But,
Just based
Or-
on
or-
where the utility is at financially, we're now in a position where, as an outside entity, looking at the financial health of our utility, if we don't want to accept that real-time rate adjustment monthly, then we're looking at 7 to 8% increases over the next 3 years and probably something higher than 2% beyond that.
correct.
Or go back to the alternative that you're not recommending, and you're looking at an 18% increase to get us up to where we
To
should
catch
be,
up. Correct.
and then incrementally beyond that.
Correct. And what a PCA does, it will protect the ratepayer in the future, right? It not only protects the utility, but it protects the ratepayer. When power supply costs go up, the PCA will be positive or go up slowly or incrementally. And that protects the utility, and it also protects the ratepayer because so you can avoid this type of situation in the future, right? We can have smaller incremental rate increases in the future instead of waiting and delaying and then needing really double-digit rate increases. If we can have small yearly incremental rate increases to keep up with inflation or changes in costs, we can avoid these 18% double-digit rate increases, or these 3 years of higher rate increases. So the PCA is there to protect the utility, and it's there to protect the customer. Not only from a rate increase basis, but if, for example, that falls off, the PCA can go negative, or the PCA could be 1 penny in a month, right? And power supply cost changes and it goes down, and maybe next month it's a half a penny. It protected the utility financially, and it protected the customer. So again, we're adapting these all across the country to help stabilize power supply costs, because they're so volatile in the market right now. It's just, you see cash plummeting in utilities across the country. But excellent question. That would be close to 8% for 3 years, and probably more beyond that.
No, I appreciate what you are showing, and I hope that this presentation scares my fellow board members, because that is very concerning, the direction that the utility is heading. And again, nobody really wants to talk about it, but it goes back to decisions that have been made by previous boards, which have led us to where we're at right now. If you go back to the teen years where rate decreases were approved, I believe they amounted to like 17 to 18%
18%.
over that 2 to 3 year time period. And coincidentally, the alternative that you don't want to recommend is the need for an 18% increase. Now, isn't that coincidental that the decreases 10, 11 years ago, well, now we're having to pay the piper. Decreased it 17 to 18% back in the teen years. Now we're faced with an 18% increase to get us back where we should be. We can modify that because that's drastic by doing something like this. God forbid, we're talking incremental increases, which is what I preach every year. I'll be interested to see the board's reaction to your recommendation for incremental increases with a PCA. I wish we could have a PCA for the general fund.
I can't emphasize enough how much a rate increase need doesn't go away. It only compounds. So when your costs increase and you don't keep up with them, that rate increase need in the future only compounds. And I know these are difficult decisions, but if you have a hard time putting through a 3 or 5% today, it's a harder time to put through a 7, 8, 10, 12% the next year. So that's what this plan tries to do. It's trying to catch you up while respecting the ratepayer as much as we can, but keeping the utility financially whole. I mean, you can see the direction it's headed. We've dropped significant cash, we're operating at losses, and we weren't doing that 5 years ago. Any other questions? Charlie, did you want to add more?
No, I was just going to wrap it up with you. Thank you.
I want to ask you a question. What did you mean by when you say we would have to load shading our customers? Load shading to the
Load-
customers?
Load shading.
Shedding,
Load
shedding.
shedding, load
To
shading.
the customer. What does that mean?
Are we talking about cost avoidance, or are we talking about capacity? Capacity. Our substations have a limited capacity based on physics. Our wires, our devices that attach to the wires, they have a limited capacity based on physics. Our customers demand more and more power. The wires get stretched out further and further to serve something. Now the wires are undersized. It doesn't carry enough power to serve that customer ground. So, and that goes all the way back to the substation, and we don't have enough power at the substation. Not only does one customer ground out, we have it across the system, it starts to cascade very, very bad. There are ways to mediate that, and my first reaction to that, until we get solutions in place, is to plead to the public to reduce and conserve load. It's hardly the way to operate on a daily basis. And customers, you can't cry wolf on that. They will only tolerate it so long. I found it very effective in communities that have larger industrial bases than us. Those industrial customers, they get it. When I say, hey, we got capacity problems today because the system is so loaded up, those businesses, they don't want to be forced offline. They'll send a shift home, they'll turn some lights off, they'll back off some motors. You can get most of it, but most of our customers here are residential, followed by small and medium-sized commercial. Turn off the lights, turn down the air conditioning, see how they respond. The other part of that is, when I get into contingency situation, because of the capacity of the substation, I have nowhere else to move the load. When we've tried it during Florence, I've tried it other times. The south side of the Trent River can't carry the north side of the Trent River, and vice versa. And that's what this grid grant's about. You've heard me talk about it for 7 years. Trying to get you to the finish line with some free money. I knew this was coming. Very expensive. So I think we stand a really good chance on a grant, but that's another subject. And you can help me get that grant. So just wrapping things up, I just want to be clear on what we're recommending is that 3-year rate plan, 5% increases in 2025, 26, 27 with PCA methodology. Also want to emphasize that it would be my obligation, probably it should be a requirement, that I come back to you every single year and review that. Is it performing? Is it not performing? We need to go, we go 2% this year. We go 6% next year. Can we change the PCA-based costs? Those are all decisions that you can make. They're all within your authority, and I would suggest we do it on an annual basis as I get my power supply costs for the new year, which is typically around January, February-ish, that I start laying out and revising a financial plan and a rate plan for the community. If that has support, my next step would be then to set a public hearing to further discuss both the rates and the PCA, which would be a rider to all rates. And I've drafted that language. I can share it with anybody that wants to look at it. Get a preliminary look at what that language briefly, but he's putting off on it, and we just edits until he better understands what direction the board would like to take. So, once again here, skip by this, this is a recap. With this rate plan, I talk in realized costs, total cost of service to buy all your energy, 12 cents per kilowatt hour, as we are now, up, increasing to 14 cents. Not all the digits are here we use for decimal places. Pretty steady at 14 cents per kilowatt hour, and then jumping up to 15 cents per kilowatt hour. And you can see the typical average residential customer would experience about a $14 increase here, and about a $6 increase here, then another $7 increase here in the next year. So looking at it historically, it's a good story to tell. I think you guys have done a wonderful job on keeping our rates down. We have a history of rate reductions in 2014, getting to where we're at our current rate. It's 10 years that you've kept the rates down for your residents. And now's the time to catch up. And as you can see in 2025, we're still lower than we were in 2014. 2026, we're about the same where we were in 2015. And then 2027, we're about the same amount as 2014. Pretty amazing to be able to keep the rates, go back to the rates we had in 2014 given all this inflation that's around us. That's looking at it from the cost, the customer experience total bill cost. So back in 2014, customers' total bill was just under $150. Now the customer experience is about $120, and we gradually step up to back up to around $150 range per customer. This is the same information, just looking at it differently from the cost per kilowatt hour perspective, and it tells the same story. The cost that we're charging per kilowatt hour gradually inches up with this rate plan to where we were slightly over where we were in 2014. It's a good story.
Well, Charlie, can I interject one thing?
Yes, sir.
You say it's a good story, and, because there is a big and there, that and being that the decisions that have been made as part of this story have not addressed the capital needs of the utility. We have an aging infrastructure and utility which has not been addressed as it should be. So, and that's not really reflected in this at all.
Correct.
And it should be.
It has
In addition to just looking at the rate, we have to be looking at that cost of an aggressive capital program to get the utilities back into better operating conditions from the infrastructure.
You're absolutely right. Maybe it's a better story from the customer's perspective than the utilities.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Charlie, I have a question. I'm having a hard time understanding something. When, in July of 25, we have a debt service coming off that's going to save us $280,000 a month, right? How can we why do we have to go up in our rates when we're going to be saving $280,000 a month?
It's not enough.
$280,000 a month is not enough?
We need more than $3 million a year. It's not enough.
I think one thing that we need to start talking about is where does this city want to see electric utilities go? Okay, we service customers how far? Down to Havelock? So in the past, ever since the late 80s, whenever Electric City's whole thing came about,
there was so much debt service. The philosophy was the more customers you get on the grid, the more you spread that debt service out, right?
I understand that thought, but it's short-sighted.
Okay. But I'm just saying, back in from the 1980s until now, that was the philosophy. Get more customers, you spread the debt out, it eases the burden on everybody. I've asked this question numerous times. We've got customers, myself included, that's on Duke Energy, right smack dab in the middle of the city of Newbern. Across the street from me is City of Newbern Electricity. I believe that there needs to be a conversation with Duke, because personally, I'm not interested in continuing to grow outside of our city limits. Okay, I understand the benefit of municipal supplied power. We get our City of Newbern customers get their power on quicker after a hurricane than Duke customers do typically. That's a benefit to our customers, our citizens. Do we want to continue to operate this enterprise outside of the city limits when there could be opportunities to swap customers and let Duke take on this expansive cost of expanding the system?
I've met with Duke and they told me absolutely not interested. Not interested in swapping, not interested in defining territory. I think the option there, to your point, is us making conscious decisions to serve or not serve the new load. And the amount of money required for the distance we have to go to serve that load. I don't want to go to Raleigh to pick up a light bulb, but I think density would help us.
Sure.
But West Newbern is growing. My marching orders are to serve it. We're filling in at Blue Water Rise, and more across the street's going to go. Do we serve that or not? It's customer choice. Those are decisions we could make on do we want to continue to grow and fill in. I definitely say fill in the wires that we have and try to add density to our investment already. As we all know, I mean, you stretch a wire out a mile long and only have one customer. Tough to recover the total cost of that wire based on the one customer. We can fill that in, but Duke's not interested. I've talked to them several times.
But we're servicing Blue Water Rise, right?
Yes, sir.
You don't think Duke would be interested in picking that up?
They've told me no. I've asked to swap. I've asked to define territories. I've asked to. Now, the next section that starts in Blue Water Rise, they may want to, but they're not. They're probably a mile away. They have a distribution tap that has one customer on it, that's Hunter's Bridge. Essentially, one that runs down through there. It is always off, and during storm conditions, it's back in the swamp. They have a plan to put an express feeder and replace that, but they, other than obtaining some right-of-way, they haven't done anything. Closest location they could serve it from would be back on Evans Mill area. I think they stopped kind of around there. Or they have to go up to 70 to get up there. So it would be a business decision. But those are the type of things that we could decide. The next section of West Newbern. Do you want to serve it or not? I'm there already. I would suggest that we pick up. I'm already invested in getting there. I would suggest we recover that investment.
And the last piece for me, this analysis was based off our system alone. And what we hear in the community all the time is Newbern's higher than Duke. Newbern's higher than Duke. And we all know that our utility bills as water, sewer, trash pickup, everything else, and having to explain that to a customer sometimes isn't easy. But Duke's rates have gone up. Do we have an analysis? And I know it's hard to show comparison, but is that what that is?
Yes, sir. So the blue is, the blue is New Bern 2024. Highland. The red is Duke Energy. And we do know Duke Energy is, they have, their rates for 2027 have already been approved by the Public Utility Commission. Highlands, I don't know what they have approved or not, so I left them flat across that. Those are our competitors.
To me, this is the most impactful slide that's been shown all day.
That's why I left it to the last.
That's why I just turned around and asked her, I said, you get a picture of that?
What else did I put? This is showing it the same way, but in cost per kilowatt hours. So we're at 12 cents now. Over this plan, I'm proposing to get close to 15%. Duke's at, or not 15%, Duke's at 15 cents per kilowatt hour now. 16. They're going to, they have approved 17, 17, and 17, and we're heading towards 15 cents.
In your position, would you adopt the philosophy where New Bern mirrors Duke rates?
No, I think that would be short-sighted.
How come?
Benchmarks are great. I think they're relative, but we have to be careful how we use benchmarks. I feel like if you ask me the same question, should we have the same rates as Washington or Greenville? We have different financial plans. We have different financial obligations. We have different industries. Some have built capital. Some have built fund balances over the last 5 years, 10 years. Some have not. Some are absorbing these costs right now, and then they'll eventually catch up. So I think it's important that we look at ourselves. And that's the beauty of public power, is that it's our decisions. We can reflect on ourselves what we need for the utility, what we think our customers need. Would I like to go to 17 cents per kilowatt hour today? Absolutely. I could use a little breathing room.
Charlie, does Duke have a PCA as part of their rate structure?
They do. This is the only utility I've ever worked at that doesn't have a PCA.
So you said you would go to 17 cents today, which is where Duke is at. And we're at 12, and you're recommending a 5 cent kilowatt increase, right?
5%. 5%.
5%. I was just saying that as your utility director, certainly I want to build cash as soon as possible, and I want to have enough money to do all the capital improvements that we can and pay the staff and qualified staff that know what they're doing. Yeah, if I can get 17 cents a kilowatt hour today, I'm taking it. Is it right for the community? It's not what we're recommending.
Wasn't there one slide that showed the current rate per kilowatt hour at 12, and then it would be going to 14?
Yes.
So I think that was a question that they was asking.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
I just know that as Alderman Prill said earlier, he was trying to simplify what Charlie was saying. The simplest thing for us when we're talking to our customers and our citizens is, how do you compare to Duke? And if you're telling me that a 5% annual increase, we're still lower than Duke, that's an easy story to tell.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
And I think that if you allow me to move through with this recommendation as we progress through the public hearing process and the adoption process, we already have a lot of customer information prepared and ready to go. We need to tweak it based on where we lined up. We have talking points for our customer service representative. We have talking points for our elected officials. We have talking points for staff when they get questioned about it. We have that in our hip pocket, almost finished, and we're ready to put the finishing touches on once we figure out what direction we want to go.
It would almost be nice if the electric bill was a bill by itself.
I agree.
That way you don't have to explain anything. I get people calling, complaining that the electric bill is $300 more this month than it was last month, and when you start looking at it, it's their water bill and their sewer bill that costs more, not their electric, but they just see the bottom line.
We can do that, but it would raise costs for the enterprise fund.
And Charlie, the building, you reconstructed the building, show each individual category of what their usage
Yes,
is.
ma'am.
Yeah.
Not everybody's happy with it, but and we have limitations with our bill printer and the technology. It's not exactly where I want it to be. And there's a cost, you know, for all of that. And this was a nice estimate in my mind. I'm happy with it.
So, let me get this in my mind. You're saying you were asking us for the next 5 years, go with a 5% increase, and that 5% increase includes the true up and the PCA.
And the debt service going up.
Oh, okay.
It's 5% next 3 years.
And then just, yeah.
Any other?
So we just need to give direction.
If you'd like to give direction on this at this time, we'll take it. If you want to think about it, do that as well.
I'm gonna need to think about it personally. That's a lot of information about it.
Understood. And we can send this information out if you want it. I would also tell you that time is probably important. We're already receiving power bills for the rider costs, about $300,000 a month. It's not budgeted. We've got the April bill for second week of May. May's bill's coming for first week of May. And I'm sure at some point in time, city management want to balance the utility budget and even know what revenues to put in there.
One last question. What determines the PCA amount?
I'll try to explain it. Chris maybe do a better job of it. We've looked historically over the last 40 years and tried to figure out how much, given our current rates, when our current rates were collecting all of our operating requirements and all of our power supply requirements, what was the cost of power at that point in time? That's the base. And that base will be stated and identified in the rider ordinance that I would propose to you. And then it becomes the difference between what that base rate is. The assumption is that base rate recovers all of our operating capital expenses. What we now need to recover is the power supply cost. So every month, staff will then take the difference between last month's power supply bill and the 0.8 PCA, calculate that difference, put that on the customer's bill as a separate line item. Actually, it'll lag about 2 months behind just because of the way power costs are received and the response times that staff is get.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Did you say that the 5% includes the PCA, or are they two separate?
Two separate. The analysis on the revenue projections, Don's slide included the 5% plus the PCA being utilized as a base of 0.081.
I just want to make sure
Zero,
that's
zero.
clear, because I think we heard something different.
Did I confuse anybody with that?
So then, if I'm not mistaken, she said that with that 5%, that'll only be cost increase for the customer of $6
With the
per month.
With the 5% and with the PCA 2025, fiscal year ending 2025, the average customer, residential customer.
It's 14.
Yes.
14.
Yes.
And then the
Then
2026 will go 7.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't do arithmetic really well in my head anymore.
What more do we need to discuss on this?
I mean, if y'all ready to give a decision,
This gentleman's come before this board many a times and talking about the electric rates and the increases, and we keep on, I'm gonna use, Alderman Creel's term, kicking the can down the road. I consider him my expert, 'cause
I would like you to
I don't know what I would do,
I would like
what
you to
we would
have-
do without you, so I don't see why we got to procrastinate on this. I mean, this is no brainer to me. And I sit here for a while and struggle through a lot of it to, those two were hit right through it, explained it very clearly to me, and you as well, so I don't have a problem with making a decision on it.
so we got one in support of the recommendation, who else?
I support it.
Two? Can I get three?
I'm comfortable
Three?
with it.
Can I get four? Just need one more.
Choice.
One more. Alderman Astor?
Is it my presentation next?
We got three that's in favor of approving the recommendation. Are you in favor of it?
Oh, my God. As recommended?
Yeah.
Yes.
There you go. So
Well,
this,
could we get everybody's?
yeah, I'll be happy to say, I said earlier that I'd like more time to digest this. If the board's ready to make a decision today, if board they are, then move forward with it.
I'll go with it.
You got five.
Abstain.
I'd be happy to sit down with you if you want to.
I mean, personally, I like to look at spreadsheets and the numbers and the data versus a PowerPoint. I can take any spreadsheet that Kim gives me and I can make you a PowerPoint that says whatever you want it to say. But I would like to see a little bit more, but it doesn't matter, you got it.
I can give you the information you want.
Okay,
Well, if we just had a presentation that had shown the impact over the last 11 years of decisions being made to reduce the rates initially and then not increase the rates at all for 9 years. And look at where it's put us. How much more thought needs to go into that before you acknowledge that those decisions have created a problem for us? We can push it off if we want to, and the utility is going to be just that much farther in the hole next year and the year after that.
I'm happy to answer that, and as an
I
elected
would
official,
love to hear.
an elected official for over 10 years, I've heard from numerous customers that overpay on their electric bill for decades, and they were pleased with the relief that we're able to provide. So that's the reason I would do it.
And so short-term decisions are creating long-term problems. That to me is not responsible governance by previous boards or by us.
Well, I'm glad to see the impact you're making in the 2 years you've been here, Alderman. Congratulations.
Well, I don't feel I'm making much of an impact. I can't seem to convince too many people of,
I think you got,
We all
I
have
think
our
you got
own-
five. That's
we-
pretty good in government. so.
We all have our own decisions that we have to make. And I personally think you have made an impact. I think every one of us has made an impact on this board.
And you also have to remember, we also have to remember, we got 6
What's
wards, and
that?
everybody is here to represent different aspects of our city. I represented Ward 6 for many years. They have a different opinion than Ward 1, and Ward 4, and Ward 5.
Exactly.
So,
Right, everybody got their own opinion.
So Mayor, if I may say, this will not be adopted in line with this budget approval. It's gonna take time for staff to work with the attorney on this part, but the public hearing will be announced. Could be at some point late June, possibly 1st of July, and then that process will follow. So, there will be, to balance this current budget for the electric utility, there will be fund balance or cash on hand allocated. Cash on hand will be used to balance this budget for the electric fund. Yeah. So, we've been going for a while. If anyone would like to take a short break?
Yes.
making a motion?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor say aye. We are in recess.
Go outside and warm up.
You ready? All right, so back in session. Mr. Hughes.
Okay, and the next to save time, we've got the enterprise fund coming up next. We've got water and sewer fund. We've got Jordan here. If you have any questions, he's happy to address them. Otherwise, we're going to continue to move on. So. All right. So we did not talk about the electric fund. We tried to talk about the proposed rate increase. So our next is the electric fund. If you have any questions on that budget, Charlie's here and he's happy to address it.
I do. Charlie, you have 10 vacancies in your department. 7 of those have been vacant for over a year. One of them's been vacant since July of 21. 2 of them have been vacant since May of 22. Would you help provide some clarity on that?
If I had this, I go down one by one.
Without help.
Electric engineering manager position, it's the wrong pay grade, I can't seem to hire anybody last month. I thought this one time, she was making more than her supervisor, and I think she was taking a pay reduction. IT system analyst, that is something I'm planning on using in the future. I haven't advertised that yet for marketed that. Tree trimmer ground worker, those are turnovers. Utility control system operator, that's turnover. The one that's from 2021 is one that I put in there in response to the broadband providers. Not really interested in giving that up yet. We are experiencing some shorthandedness and overload in that control room, so I'd like to hang on to that. But I got to hire the other one first. We've got constant turnover there. That's a night shift job. That operation runs 24/7, so I'm looking for people with 12-hour shifts that takes a special person, and the pay is low. Billing service representative, that's a turnover. Utility service technician, that's a one we haven't been able to fill yet. Payment services supervisor. That's one I'm holding for promotion with. I got all new staff over there. And probably my most experienced senior has 1 year as senior. So I'm reserving that for one of those individuals to step up when they're ready to be supervisor. So,
Okay.
did that answer your question?
Yep, thank you.
Any other questions on electric? Okay. We'll move on to solid waste. Does anyone have any questions on solid waste?
Any recommended rate increase?
Yes.
Oh, we already
covered that.
covered that one yesterday.
I do have one question, I don't know where I wrote it. I just had a question about, the personnel request wasn't approved, right? But I still had a question about it. Bear with me. currently, those are being handled by Pam and Sherry.
Pam and Sherry are handling all the solid waste stuff right now.
And do we know what their breakdown is of what percentage would be solid waste versus public works?
Currently, Sherry probably at least 50% per day is solid waste costs.
So if you put those two together, 25% is solid waste versus 75% being public works.
Most likely between her and Pam.
Okay, all right. The other question I had, was, and I know this wasn't approved either, just a question I had, for your public works, since you're up there, the senior accountant, you were asking for a senior accountant.
We currently have that position or role being filled from a temp service.
Right.
And it's somebody actually that came from finance and they have been utilizing, and she has been a huge asset. Understanding that currently we have, now this is ARPA, grant funds and capital expenditures. We currently have 14 different contracts that are active, over $13 million of work. This helps facilitate that in our grant response and all of our contract documents.
So from a supervisory standpoint, would that person, if it would have been funded, report to you or finance?
Either or would have been fine, because she's a direct conduit to our finance department. And that is what she is served as conduit.
So do we have any other positions like that in any other department that doesn't report to finance?
No, we actually recognized the struggle, the challenges that they were having. And so when I brought in that temp and saw her skill set, specifically reached out and worked with George to put her in that role. She does a very, very good job of keeping them following.
Compliance with finance.
Yeah, following the processes and the policies. And so she's worked as a liaison as well, just to kind of help them understand why we ask for what we ask for as well, to get their buy-in really. And we found that it's very, very successful. She's helped with the budget process as well tremendously.
Yes.
You know, so she definitely has been an asset over there, and she understands finance well. She continues to report between the two. To answer your question, there's nobody else that's set up that way. I would think it would probably fall under finance, but working together as, I wouldn't be a direct report necessarily, because she does report out to Public Works.
Do we know what the cost of her expenses through the temp service?
Yes.
I know I went back to the general fund, but I'm sorry, I was late. I had that question, I forgot to ask yesterday.
So while she's looking for that, and just, I know you said y'all discussed, was it solid waste yesterday?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you have a rate increase?
Yes, just a middle rate increase, and that's reflective of one, our contractual obligations with GFL. So they have their, our residential is based off the Southern CPI, which was 3.7 this year, but it's capped at 3%. So we had that carry cost. The commercial container was based on the same Southern CPI rating, but that is only capped at 5%, so it did not meet the 5% limit, so it did increase 3.5. So the recommendation is right now, we have a rate increase for our residential, which is the one on street rescue service. We're going up 35 cents a month from $19 to $19.35.
Okay.
And there's also been an additional $1 tipping fee through Slama at the landfill that we have to cover also.
You said 19 to 1935?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay.
Yes, ma'am. And we did this last year. We had a larger increase, but with our contractual increases every year, unless we get into a deflationary station with our economy, I would like to do it this way. That way, we're not trying to catch up. We can just kind of stay with whatever our pass-through costs are to the customer.
Was any capital for solid waste approved?
We had one vehicle, and that will be swapping to our litter crew. And then we had some repairs to the single axle dump truck that needs a little more substantial repairs, but it structurally is a good vehicle. We just need the defroster and some of the internal electrical work on, but it'll still function.
Okay. Any other questions?
questions on solid waste? We've got our other funds, and Kim, would you like to cover some of the other funds, see if they have questions?
Other funds?
That starts on page 239.
So the page 239 is the MSD funds. There's nothing really significant in there. Do you have any questions on that?
Alderman Creel and Royal, both on the MSD committee, questions about that?
I don't have, the committee's working through review of projects, so it'll be a little while before we see any recommendations under the performance market, which we've already addressed.
And we'll amend the budget as we need to, as those projects are approved. There's nothing recommended on 242, 243. And 244 is the redevelopment commission. As well as 245.
So on the redevelopment commission, the manager recommended 43. Do we know what that was going to be used for?
And so this does not come out of general fund balance, this comes out of the redevelopment commission fund balance. The only thing that the general fund is covering for the redevelopment commission is the salary and benefits for the executive director as well as travel and training. Redevelopment commission fund balance covers everything else.
Do we know what that fund balance is for the redevelopment commission? Roughly, because I know that because they had some ARPA funding from Alderman Astor for the project fund for the houses, and then they didn't use all that, right?
But that stays within the ARPA funds. We don't transfer that money over to that fund.
Okay.
That stays, so we could track it, stays within the.
So the delta and what was approved for them to spend versus what they spend stays in the ARPA account? Okay.
And so what was that total, Mr. Hughes, that you said the travel and training and the salary and so forth, that total what?
Salaries for the executive director. Bear with me 1 second.
Yes, sir.
That, with the travel and training, I think the request was, we'll give that to you, that was cut after last night as well. I want to make sure we give you the accurate information.
You said part of that was cut.
The travel and training was, yes.
Redevelopment commission is about 360,000 for balance.
Is that all unencumbered, uncommitted?
We have to, it'd take us a minute to figure that out.
That should be, that does not include whatever happens when they,
So the money for the clinic is not part of that?
that's already been dispersed.
No, I thought they were actually.
You may do a lot better in case those 3 houses.
So with the redevelopment commission, travel and training, the request was $3,500 and we knocked that down to $2,500. And then
So actually, you can see that on page 120 in your budget book. Shows the general fund's portion of redevelopment. It's got his salary and benefits.
What page is that again?
that is under the development services tab.
Page 120.
Okay, can you just give me the quote, please? I got the travel and training amount.
they requested 35, and they got 25.
And the professional services, which is the salaries, 105, 252, and fringe benefits is 38,870.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
We have MPO on page 246 and 247 through 248. It's actually broken up into two different program divisions, right? Yep, they've got two different grants that support that. You'll see that through page 250. And then grants on 251 is, we closed out 2320 and moved it to 20. Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, that'll get amended when we close out the year and roll it forward. So we don't budget for that. And then 2911, which is on page 253, is the E911. And the expenses are on 254. Special revenue funds on 255. It's police restricted revenue. And 256, are the expenses. DOJ revenues are, the grant is on 257 and 258. The first, special. The treasurer. Yeah. But those remain. Or we don't budget for those.
We did.
Yeah. The facade is on 261 and 262.
I have a question about that.
Yes.
What, can somebody refresh me on what that is?
Facade improvement grant.
Yeah, what, it's for a certain area?
It's basically 5 Points corridor, the redevelopment area. Those businesses have the opportunity to apply. I think we normally have $10,000 allocated in that. And traditionally, we'll award 2 grants annually for that project.
Is it all in the redevelopment commission area?
No, some of it's outside of that.
Try to find a way to run an account.
Then we move into some capital funds. 4311 is the water capital reserve on page 263 and 264. We have sewer capital reserve on page 265 and 266. Nothing budgeted there. And the rest of them are just, you can go right through to 271, which is the employees' benefit fund for insurance. Do you have any questions on any of those?
Anybody have questions on this? Okay, I have a question on the third page. Um, 51, it's under special appropriation. the training was, cut. And was our special appropriation cut as well?
Yes,
Yeah.
to $500.
Okay. Okay. Now, another question, for the special appropriation community development, the request was 50,000, but now 25. What is that money?
That is if the board has a project that they would like to address or a study that you would like to conduct. Those are those funds. If it ends up being, if you want to do something and we need additional funds, it'll just be in the form of a budget amendment at your direction. This year, we did not use any of those funds. That's why we cut it down to $25,000.
So now, explain to me again, specifically, if I come to you, or if I have a project or something.
It would be
I need
generated by the
board
governing board.
Right.
Some examples in the past, when the Newbern High School football team won the state championship and we provided lunch, that was something that was used in the
Okay.
past.
Okay.
I think also there may have been a project that comes up in the middle of the year and there may need to be an appraisal done. I think some of those funds have been used to do like appraisals. It's almost like the appropriation for us, it's almost like an appropriation line item for the future.
Okay.
Again, I apologize for missing this morning, or earlier today. Did you get the contract for the library?
No, we haven't gotten that yet.
Okay, so that's all the funds that we were set to discuss. So the next on the agenda is public comment. Are there anybody who would like to make a public comment on the above section? Okay, hearing none, we will move on, closed session. That is to discuss a personnel matter. Section, you have that in front of you?
Do not.
It is 143, 3, 10, 11.
Mayor, I do have an answer for the part-time employee in public works as well.
Okay.
At part-time, we pay $34,500. Contracted services.
The request was for 28,000 for part-time, so.
I don't make good sense of it.
I can explain that.
Well, we can, the line is on. Did the 28,000 dollars include the benefits? When I say benefits, I mean retirement.
The difference between the two was the rate we pay in the temp agency versus what she received, so we compress that down and actually, so we're just paying her.
Okay.
They'll just make more sense.
Okay. Because there's liability for things that come out. So, we'll need a motion to go into closed session. It will be pursuant to 143, 3, 18, 11, 6.
So moved.
Have a motion and a second to go into closed session. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're in closed session. Okay, we are back in open session. Is there anything else to discuss?
Motion to close.
Make a motion to adjourn.
We have a
Whatever
motion.
you call it.
A motion to adjourn.
Second.
And a motion and a second.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
We're adjourned.